Well, let's start. It's 2 o'clock now, and welcome to the, I don't know, I think it's the fourth press conference today, or maybe the third, I don't know. Anyhow, the third press conference today about methane in aquatic sediments. And I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Alina Stadnitskaia. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think so. From the Dutch Institute for Sea Research on Texel in the Netherlands. Dr. Helge Niemann is in the middle, from the University of Basel, Institute for Environmental Geoscience, and Dr. Tomas Feseker from EGU2009 in, I think it's in Bremen, is it?
It's in Kiel.
Kiel, okay, in Germany. Okay, who will start? Alina?
I think I will start, and I would like to start with thanking us to invite here to give us a chance to share our research thoughts, some statements with the broad public. And we decided to organize this press conference instead of that three of us would have the 10 minutes of presentation with a statement, so we decided to put it in one presentation, which will be a bit longer. But it is my honor and actually quite a big responsibility to present and combine everything which we decided to put in this topic. This is actually the name of our session, which will be tomorrow, as you can see here. So everybody is welcome. I hope we all will have fun there to discuss various subjects within the methane in aquatic environments theme. And to start with, I would like to show you the main kind of points but would like to rise here and have a discussion afterwards. Of course, methane in marine system or in general methane theme is not the new one, but we're still learning a lot on a daily basis. And the knowledge is not sufficient, and we would like to extend this knowledge about methane budgets in global and space and time. That's what we're lacking now, present day. First of all, localized emissions of methane are really hotspots. It's hotspots in many aspects, in aspect of geo and biogeochemistry and biology. So what is the global importance of diffusing emissions over large area? Diffusing means it's not a focus but distributed within the sediments. This is a big question. So we're looking now more into the aerial, or in the region parts like continental shelf, deeper continental slopes, abyssal basins, and then moving to the terrestrial environments, fresh lakes, freshwater lakes, and other fresh bodies. After 2 decades of studying focused and local emissions, we understand that methane-driven systems are extremely dynamical, and then the episodical events are really highly taking place. And furthermore, finding there are certain associates which apparently geological record of the past emissions. So we have a question, is the past is the key of the present, and can we actually read the information which is encrypted in the geological record talking about methane-related rock? And I brought one for you to touch and to feel what is it if you're interested in. That is real microbial methane-related carbonate in this case. So outline of presentation will contain this introduction on methyl cycle. So what methane is, chemical properties, and that is greenhouse gas, sources and sinks. Then I will move to the microbial methane filter in the ocean, so marine environments, paleo record and methane-derived carbonate, so what we can read from this kind of not really nice looking stone. Episodic emissions, that's what I just mentioned above, and microbial filter in the freshwater system. So everything is genius, is simple, that we all know, and methane is the simplest hydrocarbon on Earth. Simpler is not possible. Apparently, we can meet it everywhere, in atmosphere, in the biogeospheres, even in the solar systems and other planets, so Mars methane or titanium methane, so that is not new anymore. Because of its very simple molecule structure, so it's a bind and then it can migrate upwards, and this process is very natural and actually studied a lot both in academia and also petroleum geologists and chemists to understand how these hydrocarbons are migrated in the deep earth upwards. Well, it's a simple but apparently dangerous, making a lot of problem for us apparently. So we all know that it's aggressive greenhouse gas, and that has much more potential in infrared emission than the same amount of CO2. So it absorbs infrared radiation, affects atmospheric ozone layer, and leads to the ocean acidification. And if you look on this picture here, where is the global average methane concentration presented by NOAA, so the blue line is the actual measurements, and a red line is predicted trend actually, and we see that it's increased drastically over the past 20 years. So about the sources, we skip anthropogenic sources, of course it's not our thematic, and we divide it in two big, let's say, realms. It's marine and terrestrial. And we are talking and specializing in so-called cold seepages, which means that it's seepage of fossil fuels, oil and gas, and it leads to formation of secondary subsurface hydrocarbon gas accumulations. It makes actually inducing formation of huge geological structures at the seafloor, which are called mud volcanoes. They are similar to the kind of lava volcanoes, but they emitted only mud and hydrocarbons and other dangerous fluids, and formation of gas hydrates. So that's how mud volcano look on a seismic profile. And that is in the Black Sea. You see it's a 2 kilometer. It's not the biggest representative, and this is the pathway actually where fluids are coming from. And these fluids, they can come from the depths up to 10 kilometers from the deep below. In fact, but we can say that these mud volcanoes can be free for us, free of charge drilling wells. And when the methane or gases come into the subsurface and under the certain pressure and temperature conditions, methane become to form a, let's say, solid phase, which is called gas hydrate. And this is unique association of huge chunks of gas hydrates with the petroleum seepage, which was also taken from the mud volcano in the Black Sea. And I will not touch this topic more because it's a very interesting subject for the next press conference here. And terrestrial. So if we see terrestrial actually sources are really nowadays one of the frontier subjects. It's wetlands, permafrosts which are melting, freshwater bodies. And apparently we never put a lot of attention on continent and concentrated only on the marine. But if we look on this image of the northern hemisphere, so we see that the main methane is coming from the wetlands and melting permafrost. So to introduce the specialists in all these areas, so Tomas, Feseker, can give you all precise information about mud volcanoes as a petroleum system and geoprocesses related to that. So Tina, as I mentioned, I just take a chance to advertise her press conference, so it will be gas hydrates and related topics. And Helge is an expert about the freshwater methane cycle. So, role of microbes. So we know that on Earth the most of the methane is produced by microbes. And the processes as almost is really old one, from 2.7 to 3.2 billion years old. So they are one of the first inhabitants of our Earth. And nowadays that the marine methanogens produce 150 million tons of methane per year. Next to that we have a wetlands methanogens which are additionally bring 100 million tons. So if we look at this image, which is actually the satellite coverage of the seepage just in Northern Europe and Africa, so I didn't put the global, next to this microbial activity we have a seepage of the fossil hydrocarbons, which is also dominantly methane. So in fact, in total we are dealing with a huge amount of this dangerous greenhouse gas in our atmosphere, but for some reasons we are still alive, and not only we are. And looking on this general methane concentration plot global, apparently we can see that methane somehow is not really contributing into the global methane budget compared to the continents, compared to the, compare for instance this northern part of Russia and the Arctic areas. So what is happening there? Apparently there are sinks, and one of the sinks, it's a marine sinks in environments, and it's microbial process called anaerobic oxidation of methane. Let me indicate anaerobic means that the process is not tolerated to oxygen, so it's all performed by microbe. It's strictly strictly anoxic environments, no oxygen at all, and it depends on sulfate. That's why it's called SRM. So what is happening in the sediments, the simple plot is that methane is consumed and sulfate is also consumed. So here we have this, it's called methane sulfate transition zone, and when this process is happening, so the methane is almost take off from the sediments and before sulfate is depleted. And that was, you see, even suggested in '74. So that is actually the network suggested mechanism of this microbially mediated reaction. So sulfate is the oxidant, if you can say like that, and at the end we receive carbonate, sulfide and water. And sulfide is also, let's say, corrosive compound which smells like rotten eggs, so not really pleasant one. And these processes take place here. And nowadays we know that more than 80% of uprising methane in the ocean is actually removed by these microbes or by the microbial processes, anaerobic oxidation of methane. The mediation of the process is accomplished by two microorganisms. So that is the very famous picture of Antje Boytes, who actually showed to the world who are they and how they look like. It's a syntrophic consortia of methanotrophic archaea, methanotrophic because it eats methane and not producing, and sulfate-reducing bacteria. The big problem is that this kind of methanotrophic system is not possible to culture yet. So we know what are they doing, we actually know how they look like, but we don't know their pathways and metabolism, so it is still mysterious. So we try from indirect sites find out more and more about how these guys are working. So apparently this process is leading to two main, let's say, parts. It's a carbonates, this ones, and a biomass, well, this one. However, in the freshwater environments, this as sulfate-dependent anaerobic oxidation of methane is not really, well, it's not, it cannot be really accomplished because of the sulfate limitation, but we will talk about it later. So when we compare microbes from the fossil, so these ones, and with the modern microbial mats, it's a Black Sea, and actually it's the only setting where we can deal with real anaerobic methane-dependent systems, since Black Sea is an anoxic basin. And we see that microbes which were found in this fossil, thousands years old carbonate, and microbes which were found in the now currently active methanotrophic mats are actually similar, or they are close related. Therefore, their phylogenetic proximity, so from fossil and nowadays alive microbes, can give us an evidence that at least these archaea keep their environmental niche at least for several thousand years. So going into the small slice of marine sediments and look how methane and sulfide cycles are working there. Here is the small cartoon. That's when we have no any methane emissions. We have sulfate-reducing bacteria in already oxygen minimum zone, which eats organic matter producing carbon dioxide and sulfate, and a bit below there is methanogenic bacteria which eats organic matter and producing methane. And then when methane is dissipating slowly upwards into the oxygen zone, so there is a bacteria which eat methane, which are also methanotrophs, but they need to have oxygen for their life, so they eat this methane producing CO2. But then the environment's completely changing when we have an additional input of migrated methane or other hydrocarbons. Then this anaerobic oxidation of methane with sulfate performed by methanotrophic archaea sulfate-reducing bacteria is taking place. And I put this net reaction just to show you this history of carbon. So carbon from methane goes to CO2 and then into carbonates. That's why these carbonates possess the initial signal about actually the history of methane seepage and the history, so how microbes they consume it, then via their metabolism, which we still don't know, they eventually make it to be introduced into the carbonate structure. So then we have formation, that's our gradients, how they are going, our M zone and carbonates. So as I said, two major things. So that's biomass and the carbonate. And then later on, we have the formation, so-called chemosynthetic communities, which are living on this, like in this case, it's a sulfide, so BGO is sulfide, and they are also helping us, or helping our hydrosphere to emit, for instance, sulfide in the water column. And now if we go to this relics, because apparently in that what we know now, that what we've seen from our video observations, only relict carbonate system except the Black Sea we are dealing with. And I would like to share with you how it looks like at the seafloor. So I bring you into the seafloor of Nile, deep sea fan. This is the central part. And this what you see is all buried carbonates. These white dots are dead clams, chemosynthetical clams, which are living on methane oxidation products. So the thickness of these carbonates can reach a few meters. And you see there are open folds and these dead animals everywhere. Then we meet these remnants, and these are kind of like towers, and each of this layer of this tower possesses information about past seepage, microbes, when it happened, how, and what kind of environment in the area was at that time. So this small piece, which is just now taken by Quest, fancy remote operated vehicle, is actually only in one we know when in the middle of this small structure this all happened. But we see we are dealing with the real build-ups. So to study them is give us a chance to reconstruct a paleo seepage in the area and what happened in the water column in a bit global sense. So going further to these fossil carbonates and how the life signal can be imprinted in them, that is another example from this carbonate, and that is aragonite. Aragonite is a carbonate mineral. This is crystal, and here we see this very strange worms-like microbes. And in fact, close look, so I couldn't put all, of course, picture from microscope. Close look shows that they are kind of like diving through the crystal. So they are diluting somehow and apparently thriving there like in the water or in the butter, whatever you call it. And if we put it next to the recent analog which we could find, that is more speculation actually than the proved fact, but just how they look like, if we compare them with the Anami-1, this is one of the methanotrophic archaeo group cells, it looks pretty similar. These studies are still, they're still in process, and we are working on that, try to determine who are there, but they are indeed methane related, and they were involved to make these big towers in the Nile area. And then if we look on a scan electron microscope and to see on what is actually stored, what kind of heritage we had from these carbonates, so that looks like indeed this microbial consortia of archaea and whatever sulfite-reducing bacteria, we don't know. And this type of shapes which are, it's organic, so it is most likely bacteria or microbes, but unfortunately there is no information about on the species level or who are they. So we also try to find heart and try to understand actually what kind of ecosystem or diversity of microbes is stored over there inside the stones. Then we go into the episodic emission. That is really interesting matter. You see now the same spot. It's actually North Alex mud volcano. This is also a Nile deep sea fan. This was taken in 2003 and this was taken in 2008. Well, besides that, the obvious difference in the morphology of the seafloor, so that is how it's looking when the mud volcano is erupted. So it's rough, it's not eroded, and you see that here it's just a small, simple seepages. Here it seeps constantly, and that's what we when we talk about episodic emission, that is only 5 years. So what happening in the global term and in the global scale, we do not know yet. And going further, so like temperature measurements, which was done by Tomas and colleagues, so they did the snapshot observation. So this is the North Alec, so it's quite simple plot. It's a temperature. So here you have sediment depth. So that is temperature in 2008, and the high temperature indicate high activity because fluids are coming out and then they are a bit warmer than the surrounding seawater before they came into the equilibrium. But if we look here, what was in 2003 and 2004 in the North Alec mud volcano, so it actually was inactive. We looking on the time, what was in between, we have no idea. And then imagine if we put it all together, this is just the data, and then how ecosystem and bio and geo is interacted and that working in the sediment. We still don't know. That's why we need to have much more in situ experiments and over the time to get this information, to moderate them. And this is also data from Tomas, and that is already long-term observation from the September 2005 to July 2006. And that is within one mud volcano, so it's constantly was at the seafloor, and you see it's Hako mud volcano in Arctic areas, and that it was having very high activity, then it somehow dropped down, and then it became to be less active, and then the activity started to increase. What is the cause for this? What is the triggering mechanism which suddenly induce a structure or fluids migrated upwards? We can discuss about it for hours, but you know, they are so multiple, and it's difficult to say. But in fact, this is a very strong argument that we are talking about the episodic emissions, which we still have to collect this data more and more all over the globe. Now going into the continental realms. This is just, for instance, a small snapshot from somewhere in Siberia, and the Siberia is huge, and it is known to have a lot of lakes and swamps and a peat bogs, and it's all melts now. And as an example of methane ebullition and melting methane, you have here, so that is the Nature paper, well known. Where they're showing the methane bubbles under the actual ice. So it's a really drastic amount of methane now going from the melting permafrost and the swamp areas. So, and this is data come from the Helge, Niemann, and with the colleagues, and one of the first who performed the measurements of on methane and isotopes in the lake system in Switzerland. Indeed, you have methane over here, although the concentration you say is not high, but it is 20 times more oversaturated over the global just average. So, and then they caught that methane is consumed, but then it's lake, so you say that it cannot consume anaerobically, means without oxygen, because there are oxygen. But apparently, so Helge measured that indeed the anaerobic methanotrophy is going on there, but who, how, and by what kind of processes, it is unknown. So that is another thing of anaerobic oxidation of methane with nitrogen. Is very recently discovered processes and freshly published by Rachur, Basing, and Edweg, and it was found out that this process is mediated by bacteria. That is the possible candidate for that, but unfortunately in the real environments, so it was not proven yet. So we have to still, so it was received from the bioreactor enrichment culture, and we still have to get more experiments done on the freshwater or on the lake systems. The conclusive remarks which we would like to make at the end, that methane cycle indeed affects all our Earth system. So microbial methane production and consumption beyond being already discovered for the some, well, although not long time, but still is yet a mystery and not well understood processes. And they are the major key players in keeping actually us and our climate in that statement like we probably have it now. But apparently this is all not new, so that all happened probably during geological history. Only now we start to learn and to get closer and closer to understanding this whole system. So we need more multidisciplinary scientific strategies and technologies. And that's actually the most fantastic approach which was devoted in scientific community over the past decade, let's say, when scientists decided that, okay, we want to work together. You cannot, as a chemist or biologist or geologist, work in the same object just separately. This system is complicated, it's open system, which means a lot of processes interacted, and only together, using our brainstorming, we can understand perhaps how it's all working. So that will all give us a potential for methane removal from the atmosphere when we understand how this methanotrophy, for instance, works. So we probably can use microbes to take as much as possible carbon out of atmosphere as we want, and then transfer it and use it for the human goods. And of course it is important, since we're dealing with the petroleum system initially, to have a close cooperation and more involvement of industry to this kind of research. And now we would like to indicate some session highlights which we'll have tomorrow. Well, actually the all talks, they are very excited, that's why we choose them as a talks, and we cannot of course now put all of them. There is a program exists. And the very interesting invited talk actually will given at the beginning of this session by Martin Hovland, and he's working for the Statoil and dealing actually with the seepage from the very, very beginning. He is one of the founders, the first pockmarks in the North Sea, and publishing the first book, which called Pockmarks and Seepage and the Pockmarks in the North Sea. And from him actually the innovation of this study starts to grow. So another one, it's presented by Shachova, sources of methane in Eastern Siberian Arctic. Arctic is absolutely not known for us region. There is a few expeditions were done, so there is only single observations, and we want to know more and more about this northern, the very, very northern part of our Earth. Hardenberg will present the new proxy of methanogenic food webs contribution. He will show how on the chemistry and so-called isotopes we can identify them. And the PhD student from Ghent University, Yu Zhang, will show us the simulator of deep sea biosphere and actually anaerobic methanotrophy. So she made it by herself and had to experiment and suffer a lot actually to get some results. So I guess that was all our message, and we are pleased and open for the discussions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alina, for a very interesting introduction. Are there any questions from the room? Okay. Helge, can you say your name?
Question to your fossils. If you look at these filaments, how can you be sure that these are microbial origin and not, let's say, unorganic filaments?
This is every time question of advocate of evil, actually. This, it is pretty, using techniques, for instance, to prepare a sample, this carbonate sample, we use some certain coating, and then the observation is taken with a beam which is very, very high temperature. So if it would be inorganic or something like that, or alive, for instance, like other people, how do you know that they are fossil not alive? It will be burned. Then we did the precise measurements into whatever point we actually want. It is organic. So that's for sure. In terms of filaments and in terms of how we can compare it with the modern microbial mats and modern actually images of this microbial slime or microbial mats, and they are very similar. To say 100% sure, no, I wouldn't dare, but to be honest, it is very close. We try now to perform SIMS measurements in Astrobiology Centrum in California, and this actually technique will allow us to tell exactly whether we deal with the microbes or with the something organic which looks like microbes, but that it is organic, that's for sure. And isotopes give another evidence that indeed these organics derived from methane. So, if I answer your question.
Okay, so Kverin Chima from Nature. I have a question concerning methane concentrations, global atmospheric concentrations. I'm not quite sure, but I understand concentrations have been pretty stable for throughout the 1990s or longer. But then a few years ago, I seem to remember the global atmospheric concentration started to rise again. My question is, do you have any hypothesis why this is so, and then can you constrain the sources, and is it more likely that this have been episodic emissions, or so what do we know about the reasons for rising methane concentrations?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and actually we are not sure about this. What we know is that since the industrialization, what we also see here on this slide, so that, well, actually we don't see back towards the industrialization, but we know that since the 17th century, that methane concentration were increasing tremendously, and over the last few years there was some sort of stabilization, but we don't know why methane concentration slightly. I mean, it's only slightly dropped, and why they're increasing right now. I mean, there are speculations that this has to do with global warming, but this is, let's say, on the very unsafe side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the melting of course, of permafrost and all this kind of thing contributes a lot. And actually, there is recent publications where they measured methane, and you see that indeed, in a seasonal kind of scale, the methane emissions, like during the warm periods like summer and autumn, are much higher than during the winter time. So to put it on a global scale, I also wouldn't dare, but that is one of the contribution to.
But this graph doesn't have the most recent rise.
No. Yeah, because I will explain you why. Yeah, with the most recent there is also a lot of questions, because it's all about quantification thing.
Yeah.
So you have different numbers, you have different estimations, and it's not a matter to say whether they are right or wrong, but if we want to know for sure, we first of all don't know all sources of methane in the ocean and on continents. I mean, if we're talking about, for instance, mud volcanoes, there are enormous amount of mud volcanoes on land, and they emit their methane and gas directly to the atmosphere. Not with the water column where we have this nice microbial filter or sediments, it goes directly. So that was the reason why we actually choose this smooth NOAA-related plot.
Any more questions? This first? Okay. Can you say who you are?
This is Helge from Environmental Research Web. Could you talk a bit more about using microbes as a solution for methane in the atmosphere? How that might work?
That's what Tom said. Are you sure that you want to put it because you will receive the question on it? Well, it's all about, it's a speculative, of course, but we know from not only methanotrophs, but just other microbes, for instance, like cyanobacteria can be potential source for the production of hydrogen, right? So the algae, for instance, it's a lot of about this bio-industry, so algae now is actively involved in the production of the different kind of biofuels. So about methanotrophs, what would be really, really nice, I mean, since we know how they are working, and as I will repeat myself, we don't know because they are not cultured, so we cannot trace. They can just, for instance, well, consume methane. So if we know how they work, we put the biomass, and then probably this problem with the melting permafrost and rising of methane wouldn't be a problem anymore if we can induce it into the environment. From other side, if you look, it's also quite dangerous because that's interacting with natural environments. There are a lot of questions stated why you cannot just collect or put or cover something over these melting areas and make it a big collector. Fine, but besides methane, there is an ecosystem, there is plants, animals, insects, microbes, etc. So we have to be very careful with that, actually. Doing one completely not screw another. And as another thing, I think that with my lovely carbonates, we can give to people much more building stones, so then they can, build their houses, and that actually can be another approach. It now sounds funny, but in fact there is a few companies which are seriously looking on that, as making it for building purposes for people.
If I may add to your question, there have been attempts that you, for instance, could spike natural environments such as rice paddies with sulfate, and then you would have the, let's say, building stones for anaerobic methane oxidation. So that you have a lot of methane in these rice paddies, and you would have sulfate. So you would have a potential for anaerobic methane oxidation, which is far more efficient than the aerobic oxidation of methane. But then, as Alina already pointed out, you would also have the production of sulfide, so your ponds would sort of stink like hell and also interfere a lot with the environment outside. So that's something that is, let's say, not really desirable. Another thing which, and this is also why we said that this is a future potential, that you could build some sort of bioreactor where you have these organisms in culture, and in whatever industry that is having lots of methane, that is, let's say, sort of a waste product, you could then filter this out from the exhaust. But this is, let's say, really far in the future.
Helge Kocher, freelance from Germany. So this future potential for geoengineering, will you be discussing it in your session, or is this a teaser for the press? A teaser for the press, for this press conference.
There is no real input from this type of thing, but we have one talk, if you can perhaps go on the last slide, which is, and this is one of the, let's say, rather new things that people are now doing, these bioreactors. And this would be, let's say, the initial step to develop such type of technology.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I mean, it's not a teaser that you will cite us somewhere. So that is an honest statement.
But it's already nice that we, well, sometimes people, they associate our Earth with a big library. So you come to a library, you have enormous amount of books, and then they are all different, old and young, and then you take one and you try to read it. So we are now, I think, took only one book out of our planet library and try to read it, but we're at the very beginning still. So.
All right, are there any more questions? No? In that case, I thank you, Alina and Helge and Tomas, for a very wonderful introduction into methane in aquatic environments. Thank you very much.